Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 Conversations in association with EbixCash. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted life as we know it, with many industries like travel and hospitality bearing the brunt of the impact. As companies cope with the challenges, new opportunities have also emerged, especially for players who have been able to leverage the power of technology to continue to serve customers. 2021 has emerged as an inflection point for many new age companies with a sharp tech underpinning, now leading to a flurry of proposed public offerings as well. One such company is EbixCash, a challenger across various segments in the financial sector, both on the B2C as well as the B2B side. From payment solutions, prepaid cards, foreign exchange, bill payments, lending, wealth and asset management, EbixCash has charted an aggressive M&A strategy and is also gearing up for an IPO. Joining me now in the studio to discuss this is the man himself, Robin Raina, the President and CEO of EbixCash. Robin, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here in our special studio. It's good to have you here and see you face to face. Let me talk to you, Robin, first about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I pointed out, it has been particularly disruptive for many of the businesses that you operate in, specifically travel as well as the remittance business, the foreign exchange business as well. How have you coped with the last 18 months?
Look, it's been a difficult time for us and for everybody. Travel and foreign exchange are directly related to COVID, so they were severely impacted. We had a few thousand people, 3,000 people plus, where we had all the expenses, but we didn't have the revenues. So it was that dramatic impact. But I'm fairly proud of what we've done, meaning while travel and forex got severely impacted, the diversity of our business showed. And even in a COVID period, in the midst of all of this happening, we kept our head high. We continued to show consistent profitability. We actually showed our cumulative average growth rate is upward of 50% still right now. We are on track to do 100 million in EBITDA for EbixCash in 2021. So I feel, while it has been a tough period and maybe our results would have been a lot better if COVID wasn't there, but look, it was a good test of our resilience.
Yes, and I know that even in your investor call at the end of your second quarter earnings, you did talk about the resilience that you've seen across many of your businesses despite the headwinds that you've had to experience and cope with. But, let me ask you this, Robin, in the context of what we're seeing happen across the fintech business, and you're across the spectrum in many of these segments. The technology underpinning has been the big opportunity and has been the big growth driver for many companies, including yours. How has that all come together for you?
Well, look, technology is key to anything that you put together. And we made a lot of acquisitions in India, close to 26 acquisitions, put in $1 billion into India. But we were able to kind of centralize all those operations, integrate them so tightly, and technology became the fulcrum of doing all of that. So if you can inculcate technology in the right way and centralize stuff, right, you can build efficiency into it. We also used the COVID time, in fact, to improve on our technology, come in with stuff that would make life easier, for example, for our customers to work from home and so on. So I would say technology has been key to our entire modus operandi in trying to grow the company.
You talked about employees and you talked about this work from home culture, which is something that we're all getting used to. And now the question is whether we're going to see a return back to office. What is going to be the new normal? I think everyone is grappling with that question. In your view, how do you see this shaping itself? Not just here in India, you've got offices across the world. What's the experience like?
Look, in my mind, the new normal has not yet been discovered. From my perspective, you cannot just substitute the flesh and blood feel. So while as a technology company, I'd like to say that I can move people remotely and they can function from there, and they are presently doing that. But I don't think there's a substitute for people being able to talk to each other, motivate each other, learn from experiences. And how do you build the culture of a company if you're not going to put people within an office? So I'm actually looking forward to getting people back into their offices. I have close to 150 offices in India right now. And most of them are empty. Most of them are working at 10% capacity with people working from home. And I am actually looking forward to getting these people back into their office, because how do you differentiate yourself? That you, as a company, you differentiate yourself by inculcating your culture within each and every employee, and that you can't just do remotely.
Yes, it is a challenge to do that over a Zoom call or FaceTime or whatever other tool that you're using. But Robin, let me ask you about the resilience that you are now starting to see, or the recovery that you are starting to see across the various segments that you operate in. Travel has started to pick up, at least as far as domestic travel is concerned. Very early signs of some pickup as far as corporate travel is concerned. What's your own sense on where we are in the stage of the recovery and how long it will take us to get back to pre-pandemic levels?
So last 3 months have been phenomenal in terms of improvement. I think as India vaccinates itself, for me the inflection point was 40% of the country getting their first vaccination, which actually has happened already. We're pretty much at that level now. So to me, this is an inflection point right now. In any economy, 40% has been an inflection point. So today what is happening in travel is that domestic travel is starting to increase. People are not still traveling as much by airline, but they're using hotels, cars, and so on, and buses and trains. Train travel has increased quite a bit. International travel is still non-existent because of quarantine reasons and so on. I do expect that this will gradually keep increasing. I feel that as we get into 2022, we will get back to 80% of our level by the end of 22. We're still not going to be at the 100% level because there are issues with inter-country relationships.
Correct.
In terms of how they quarantine, or even once COVID to some extent goes away, countries are still going to be circumspect and they're going to come up with their own set of rules which will impact visitors, right? So I do expect that ultimately by 2023 we will get back to the normal, as what we call the normal. So I think things are dramatically improving. I'm one of those who feels that we are at that inflection point right now.
And are you starting to see that happen as far as the foreign exchange business is concerned? Because that was the other business that was significantly impacted on account of the pandemic.
Absolutely. See, we conduct around $6.5 billion pre-COVID in foreign exchange. We're the largest player in India. And what we have seen is that as vaccinations are starting to happen, Forex has two components. One is simply people traveling abroad and so on, and the other is educational remittances.
That's picked up.
That has really picked up. So if in the last 3 to 4 months, educational remittances have really picked up. We do around $1.3 billion of educational remittances alone. So that has really picked up. Now, foreign exchange as a business overall in terms of corporates traveling abroad or individuals traveling abroad has picked up. It's comparatively, sequentially, I could call it a 70% growth. Quarter over quarter, even 100% growth.
Right.
But that's 100% or nothing is still a nothing. So to me, it's not a fair comparison. To me, we are nowhere near to where we need to be, where we were in a pre-COVID level. So things are dramatically improving. I do expect that by the time we get to Q4, October, November, December, things would have improved dramatically further and so on. It will keep sequentially improving as we go forward.
You know, you talked about the aggressive M&A strategy that you've adopted, 26 acquisitions here in India. Let me ask you about that. I mean, is there a market left that you would like to capture, or an audience left that you would like to capture by way of inorganic growth currently, or do you have enough on your plate that you need to digest?
Look, until I finish my IPO, I'm not going to make another acquisition. That's the present plan, because for all the regulatory reasons also it doesn't make sense. But once my IPO is done, I absolutely look forward to making a few other acquisitions. I couldn't tell you exactly what those areas are right now because it wouldn't be fair, but I will tell you that there's always
room
great
for more.
players. There's always room for more. There are great players out there where you're missing certain elements. And if you can bring in those elements and embed it. See, Ebix Cash's entire business model is about creating an airport. I like to create airports for insurance, finance, and healthcare. And to me, travel is a subset of finance. Now, this is a new paradigm in thinking. Nobody's thinking like that. People are thinking remittance is one industry, travel is another, and so on, right? I don't think like that. I feel it's ultimately the consumer is the same. Why can't we just make things easier for this consumer?
So a platform approach is what you're working with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when we do that, there are pieces that I'd still like to acquire. And so I think there's always that path we can undertake.
You know, you preempted my question on IPO. I'll get to that in just a second, but I also want to pick up on a development that's just happened, and that is a sigh of relief for you, with the court verdict in the US going in your favor, basically rejecting the claims made by Yatra, which was a potential deal that you had been working on. What does that mean? Where does that leave this particular transaction?
Look, the court ruling is black and white. It couldn't have been a more forceful ruling. I will just stop at that by saying I'm very pleased with the ruling. It is exactly what we always said. The courts ruled in our favor, and we are very thankful for finally seeing that justice has prevailed.
That is in the context of the petition being dismissed by the Delaware court, just for the benefit of our viewers who are watching for context. But let's now talk about the proposed IPO. And of course, the timelines have shifted on account of the pandemic, but you are gearing up to hit the markets perhaps as early as next year, the first half of next year?
That is presently the plan.
So where are you currently in terms of hiring advisors and so on and so forth? And what's the aspiration? How much do you intend or hope to raise?
Look, we are at a fairly advanced stage in terms of having the advisors, the lawyers, the analysts, and so on hired already, and we will expand on those further in coming days and months. Having said that, I think we're targeting an early 2022 IPO. I would not want to talk about valuations. I think that beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. We'll have our banks advisors at the right time, more towards the end of the year, as to what our valuation should be. All I can say is our numbers speak for themselves. We do believe that we are a differentiated story who has shown in a... look, we have never had a flash and pan performances. Ebix has always been consistent. EbixCash numbers from day one in India have been highly profitable. In a COVID period, we're still projecting $100 million of EBITDA and are on track to do that as of actual declared numbers as of 6-month period. So I feel very pleased with that. Rest we'll leave to our bankers and to the public to sort it out.
While you may not want to comment on the valuation, but let me ask you this. Largely primary issuance, is that what we're going to see?
Correct.
Okay. And what is the aspiration with the fundraise? Whatever it may be, $1 billion or $500 million or whatever the case may be, what do you intend to do as far as the fundraise is concerned?
Look, it's difficult for me to right now give out a number, but it'll be closer to one of the higher numbers that you said. Possibly.
Closer, possibly to the higher number that I pointed out. But, you talked about the resilience in the business, you're hoping on the recovery, and you talked about the risk mitigation strategy, which is basically to be straddling a whole bunch of sectors, but at the same time coming together at the back end as well as the front end. Explain to me what the growth strategy is going to be from here on.
Look, the growth strategy is rather simple. We've always believed that you need to bring convergence in the business. If you can bring convergence in a business, and as long as you can sit on the B2C side, B2B side, exchanges, if you can be facilitating all these three pieces, you become a part of the fiber, what I call building an airport. You become part of the hub. You become like infrastructure. To us, what has happened as we got into different industries in India, if you take majority of our play today in India and across the world, we have actually taken this intellectual property in India, EbixCash, and taken it across the world in 44 plus countries where we have deployed these solutions. If you look at what we have achieved in every sector in India, barring travel, barring B2C in travel, where there is a distinct leader, we are virtually a leader in every market segment that we have entered. And how did we achieve that? Simply by keeping our head on our shoulders, simply by being simplistic in our thought process and using technology to drive our business model.
But be more granular. How have you achieved profitability where others haven't?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to have a desire to make money. I'll start with that.
Everyone has a desire to make money.
I don't believe so. No, Shireen, I wouldn't say so. I think people are so crazy right now, especially in India, about valuations. And they feel there's an easier way to get valuations simply by showing growth. What we've tried to do, we've shown growth on one side and 50% plus CAGR. But at the same time, our focus on day one, we were ready to compromise on growth if need be. We were very focused on, at every moment, we've been focused on operating income, on EBITDA, right? That is, I think, a key. Sometimes I always say business comes down to the simplicity of knowing that selling price has to be a lot more than the cost price. It sounds simple, but a lot of people forget that. They build a strategy of saying, I'm going to lose money for the next 5 years. And once I lose money, I'm going to gain market share, and ultimately I'll start making money. That becomes very hard. That hasn't been our strategy. So when you start with that basic, it always helps. Second is, you have to have systems to run your company. Ebix is a paperless company. EbixCash, anything we do across the country today, everything has audit trails, everything is online. You can do anything within EbixCash, and it all happens on systems, everything. Whether there's a visitor coming into an EbixCash office, there's a tool called iVisitor, to the banking called iBanking, or to the expenses management called iExpense. Everything has checks and balances, tools. So what you do when you create these tools, these system-oriented tools, they are checks and balances. There are also these processes laid out where within seconds things can happen, but they're efficient. You don't spend time and money, and you also budget them properly. You know what is happening. You don't wait for the end of the quarter or the year to get a surprise. So to me, business is about simplicity. If you can simplify your business and focus on opportunities where there's a chance to dominate, right? That's a very key issue. You don't just make an acquisition in every industry or buy any competitor of yours. To me, one of the key issues when I make an acquisition, I'm thinking of, do I have an opportunity to dominate in that sector? If the answer is no, and it seems like a very profitable company, I still may not buy this company because I do care about the idea of dominating in a sector. And I think we have a particular strategy, we have followed it, we've been very disciplined financially, and we have simplified our thinking in terms of profitability. To me, those are the basics that we have followed, which have always worked for me. I've been doing this 22 years, and I have 82 quarters of financial record behind me, all public incidentally. Yeah. And I've realized that if I simplify my thinking, and if Ebix or EbixCash keeps its thinking simplistic, profitability will continue to happen.
What about debt? Since you talked about the fact that you are, of course, also chasing growth, but not at the expense of the bottom line, and all the opportunities that you hope to leverage on going forward, what's the position as far as debt is concerned?
So look, EbixCash, from an EbixCash perspective, we presently have a debt of around $4 million. That's pretty much almost nothing, and we're sitting on cash of upwards of $60 million in India. So we're in a pretty solid position. EbixCash has a convertible debt of around $350 million with the parent company, but that is more of a convertible debt, but not with an outsider, but with the parent company. So that's all we have. So we have a very strong balance sheet. We believe enough cash to leverage our business and continue to grow our business.
So, you talked about the fact that you're very clear in terms of strategy that you intend to dominate whichever segment that you operate in. What is the kind of headroom for growth that you currently see, given the fact that we're now seeing digitization take off like never before through the course of the pandemic? It's gotten easier to acquire customers, and it's probably also cheaper to acquire customers today. At least that's the experience that others are sharing with us, that the burn rate has come down. How are you seeing the industry dynamics change as well?
So Shireen, you hit the nail on the head. Basically, that's what is happening. The COVID has had so much of negativity associated with it, but it's also brought in some positives. And one of that is customer acquisition, that there is more push toward digitization, there's more push towards simplification of businesses and audit trails, which is where digitization comes in. Having said that, in the post-COVID period, we expect, for example, in our own business, as travel comes back, as foreign exchange will automatically start happening, schools will reopen, remittance, education, e-learning, which is one of our key areas where we have 7,000 private schools as a client, that business will start going up. Remittance business will continue to improve. So from my perspective, we're projecting a very strong 22 and even better 23. And clearly all of this, the push toward digitization is going to further improve. Should further improve our business.
Let me also get in a quick question, since you brought up the education business. How do you see that changing, or you reimagining that business as well? Because at least in the near future, it seems like we will have to live with this hybrid model where physical schools are now starting to reopen. In Delhi, we'll see schools reopening from the 5th of September. How do you see the education side of the business mapping itself out, given the new reality?
See, there are two aspects of education. One is classroom training, and the other is students getting trained, educated at home or wherever they are, e-learning as we call it for students. Now, let me tell you, both are required. You cannot substitute one.
Yeah.
Sometimes people talk about e-learning as if schools aren't required.
Yeah.
You cannot just substitute the flesh and blood feel of a teacher giving
Yes.
the value system, inculcating a value system in a child. No e-learning can provide that. So having said that, we look at it as these two key components. So on one side, classroom e-learning within a classroom, creating systems wherein whether it's a tribal area of Tripura or whether it is virtually any big private school in Delhi or a government school anywhere in Punjab, for example, you need a blackboard, a board wherein you can provide all this learning from a virtual reality, 2D, 3D perspective. But then as kids go back home, now there are these 8.5-inch devices. So we are coming up with these 8.5-inch devices with preloaded software, with all your NCERT program, teaching you, testing your competence, teaching you in easy manner, whether it is using gaming, whether it is using artificial intelligence,
Right.
and allowing the student to enjoy what they are learning, and then having the parents monitor what they are doing, right? So what you learn at school, you take it back home on an 8-inch device. Now, the key in this will be, sometimes we depend a lot on the internet. Look, internet is a great phenomenon in cities. For example, you can't expect in a tribal area in a remote corner of the country, the internet to work at the same efficiency. So we will need to find these smaller devices where all this software can be preloaded, right? Having cloud computing is great, and we can do that too. But we'll also have to be sensitive to the needs of the underprivileged community or these tribal area or these remote corners of the country. So I do believe in e-learning. Government of India has a strong push right now towards e-learning. And I do believe the private sector has to play a big role in trying to provide this. The new normal is that, education, kids are going to need e-learning at home.
Yeah.
Even if schools restart.
Correct.
This is a process, and the parents also need to kind of figure out a way to know what their kids are doing, and technology enables that. To me, those are the kind of few things that are happening that companies have to now figure out a way around.
Let me move away from education and come back to the mainstay, which is what's happening in the financial technology side. And I think the debate on what the challenger brands like you are going to do as far as legacy incumbents are concerned is getting a lot more real today. We're also now starting to see not just M&A, but collaborations between the legacy institutions, financial institutions, as well as new startup fintech companies, new age companies. What are the changes that you're seeing within the landscape and the changes that you hope to capitalize on?
Look, Mini, I'll just start by saying that around 1999, I went as an Indian to America and finally became CEO and the largest shareholder in an American company. I'm one of those who's basically come back, more or less. And one of the dreams I came back with, I said, I'm going to be back in India, and I do not want to bring this American company intellectual property into India. I want to create an IP within India, what I call EbixCash, an Indian IP, build an IP that allows us to create an EbixCash MNC out of India. Now there are not that many MNCs out of India, especially in the financial sector or the software sector, and creating products. There are a lot of companies who do software development as mercenaries, right, helping others conduct projects. But I'm talking about product companies creating intellectual property like Oracle did or Microsoft did. We haven't seen much of that in India. EbixCash is that effort. So today I have close to 10,000 people in India totally focused on technology, trying to provide this dream of creating this MNC, EbixCash, and deploying it across the world. Where we have taken some of this financial technology, that focus that we've had, we've taken these products across 44 countries, whether it is in the Middle East or Europe, and we have clients all across, whether it is the Societe Generale or the Northern Trust in London, or these Emirates Bank, or in 32 banks in India, and so on, and I could go on and on. But the key thing in this is, how do you build technology where IP is based here, and create a learning organization within India who can multiply this knowledge, doesn't depend on a third country to build the IP and use India as a mercenary. So today, this is, in my mind, a dream project of mine to create an IP that truly belongs to India. And that I am very proud of what we've done with EbixCash from a perspective of an India-centric technology company.
So an India-centric technology company, but serving the world, that is the dream that you have. So take me through the global aspiration. You talked about how you have clients across 44 different countries at this point in time, but what's the future?
Look, we will keep expanding that. We will keep expanding ourselves. We, even in simpler areas like travel, we today are the #1 OTA player in Indonesia. We today are the #1 OTA player in Philippines. We are in the Middle East. We have taken our business, whether it is Singapore, Australia, you're going to see us go and travel in the US, in Europe, in Brazil, kind of countries. Similarly, when you look at the financial technology side of the business, or even the financial card business, or the remittance business, or the Forex business for that matter, we intend to take this into Latin America, into North America, into Canada. We actually just started a subsidiary in Canada focusing on EbixCash operations, bought a company there, and so on. So our dreams are truly global, and we will absolutely be focused with regards to that.
And given the fact that you're operating not just here in India, but across different geographies, what's the feedback in terms of what the needs of the customer are and what kind of financial innovations you are going to be focusing on going forward? You know, what we've seen, for instance, at this point in time is, of course, the kind of explosion that we've seen as far as UPI transactions and so on and so forth, but, you know, peer-to-peer lending, pay now, bill now, pay later, and so on and so forth. What kind of innovations do you believe you're going to be focusing on to address customer needs?
Look, it's an evolving market. If I said something today, that'll be only true for today and tomorrow. I'll tell you, today India has taken a lead. What has happened with RuPay, with UPI, Government of India has done a phenomenal job in really implementing some of these tools, and I really applaud them for this. Having said that, today the opportunity is you will have to adapt. You will have to adapt, and you'll continually have to evolve. See, cloud computing is passé. Interfacing into different technologies is passé. What you will have to start figuring out, simply doing transactions of, for example, doing an e-wallet transaction, right, is not going to be enough. A lot of companies, even in India, who have done well in this, have realized that also, and so they're launching so many other different tools. Simply because what is happening in the financial arena is, as larger players are coming into the market, they're willing to just do those transactions for free, simply because they want to cross-sell something else. And in the process, if that's your only focus area, then you're going to be dead. So you need to really diversify your business. Today in the financial industry, the key game will need to be diversification. You'll need to diversify, you'll need to have end-to-end portfolio, and you really need to, first of all, understand the needs of your clients. And you need to accordingly adapt to it. There's no one thing fits all. It is going to be country specific. What works in India may or may not work in Brazil, may or may not work in the US, and so on. So we'll have to adapt. We'll have to adapt to the regulatory requirements, the tax requirements of each country, and come up with very focused intrinsic tools for each country.
Let me focus specifically on India, because that, of course, is the big market for you. Given the competitive intensity of this market at this point in time, what are the moats that you've been able to build around yourself to ensure that you not just stay differentiated, but while you're differentiated, you continue to make the money?
Look, I think what we realized, one thing is, India is a culturally very strong country. You know, when you go into countries like India or Brazil or Italy, we're family oriented, right? We like to talk. In India, if you want to buy travel, for example, and you see the best thing out there in a .com manner, you might still want to call an agent and say, you know what, should I be buying Air India? What do you think? Because people like to talk. And this is a different culture, and we have to appreciate it. Plus, there's a sector where there's the underprivileged, there's a lower middle class, and there's the middle class, and then you have the upper middle class, right? And it's a highly diversified, and the disparity between the rich and the poor is very, very high in India, right? And you cannot ignore that sector in terms of what their needs are. So today, digital only will not work in India from our perspective. You have to be phygital. You have to blend brick and mortar model with this click and mouse model, right? So that's what we have done. So today, how we differentiated ourselves, how we knew we had to build a business that really had high barriers to entry. Today, we have 300,000 franchises in India. So we are in physical locations all across the country. All these are digital locations, right? But they are physical locations. People can walk into an EbixCash outlet within minutes and do business. They can of course do it on their phones. They can of course do any functionality on any device that they want to use. But they also have the freedom to walk in or call. Today you can't just overthink what a customer wants to do. You want to be working with the client in the manner that the client wants to do business with you. So what we have been able to do, first of all, building this great network, 300,000 plus franchisee network, which incidentally is 5 times bigger than the largest bank's network in India today, right? But beyond that, we enable the use of technology and we interface different functionalities. We really interfaced, whether it is, if in finance there are 7 different functionalities happening, rather than having them leaving them piecemeal, we connected all these functionalities. And today as a consumer, we will go to the consumer and say, we will provide you end-to-end functionality. When you provide that end-to-end functionality to the consumer, and in the process while the consumer is using it, there might be a bank involved, there might be an insurer involved, there might be a health player involved, there might be an airline involved. We're also helping them with their technology, with their needs. And when you do that, you're connecting it, you're creating an airport of sorts where the barrier to entry becomes high. So this was a different paradigm of thinking. Nobody was thinking like this. But I had done something similar in the US in the field of insurance.
Right.
And I knew today that is the new normal in US. The word exchanges, when I in 2001 started talking about exchanges in insurance, nobody talked about it. Today it's a new normal. Everybody's building exchanges. But take that example per se, we created the largest exchange in the world, which has kept growing in insurance. Why? Because the barrier to entry was so high. Because we had connected so many dots, and we had created it into a catch-22 situation, where if a player wanted to get out of our exchange, he or she wanted that entire network also to move out. And so they wouldn't give up our exchange. So it's very hard for a competitor of ours to walk in and say, they'll need to reinvent that network rather than just take their business away.
You know, since you're talking about differentiation, let me ask you a question on partnerships. I mean, we've got a partnership going here, and thank you very much for actually coming into the studio, for the same. But outside of course, this is very specific partnership. What's the plan as far as partnerships for some of the other verticals are concerned?
Look, partnerships are a key part of any business, right? Meaning you need clients, you need back-end players, and you need partners. And we have partners in every sector, virtually. You know, we are a very diversified company, so it would be unfair for me to name anyone, but I'll give you an example of a partnership we recently did, for example, with MoneyGram.
MoneyGram,
You know, Western Union is a partner, RIA is a partner, MoneyGram is a partner. MoneyGram went into an exclusive relationship with us, wherein all their different agents that they presently had have also started coming underneath us. For example, Unimoney, Muthoot now are sub-agents to EbixCash. In another year's time, some of their existing sub-agents, like Thomas Cook, for example, will come underneath us, or they'll have the option of terminating their agreement with MoneyGram, because we are exclusive with MoneyGram going forward. Having said that, look, partnerships are key, right? And we take all our partners seriously, whether it is a Western Union or a RIA or a MoneyGram. To us, each and every one is important. And again, I can go into a few days back, we had MasterCard, started a campaign. Rohit Sharma, the cricketer, tweeted about EbixCash MasterCard. So we're very grateful to MasterCard. We have a great partnership going with MasterCard. We have a great partnership going with Visa. And so on. See, in a financial play, you can't just work with any one partner. You need to be secular. You really need to be agnostic. You need to really you need to work with all the larger players and all the smaller players per se. And that's how you create an airport, by working with all your partners and all the entities out there.
Well, before I let you go, Robin, let me ask you again. So the progress towards the IPO, perhaps a DRHP filing at the end of the year, is that the aim at this point in time? Before the end of the year. And that's what you're working with in terms of a timeline.
Absolutely.
And let me end by asking you, how has the pandemic changed you as a leader? You're not traveling anymore. You're pretty much sitting here in India, which is what you're focused on. How has it changed your leadership style? How has it changed you personally as well?
Well, it has impacted me quite a bit. Meaning, look, on the positive side, I've gotten to spend so much of time in India. I love India. Look, I hold a US passport, but here I have an Indian passport, and I'm very proud. I'm a very proud Indian. I just don't see anything wrong around me. When people come in and sometimes they point all the negativities, and I look at them and sometimes I see them and I say, well, then I must do something about it and change it. So I'm a very proud Indian per se. But having said that, it's been a learning experience. It's also taught me what is, for example, I've figured out that India's healthcare system is fairly inadequate. It is not because of, it's not like, the government is making an effort and various governments have made an effort, but over the years, we really don't have the infrastructure to be there. So to me, that has also led me to start thinking about a new project that I want to work on, building what I call eBig City, building smart hospitals to provide better healthcare in remote corners of India, in smaller areas, smaller state, bigger state, especially in states where there's no healthcare infrastructure today. I've personally, been dealt with this. It's a very emotional. I've been through a very emotional experience. My mom passed away in October, and at one time I had 3 of my family members in ICU at the same time, and unfortunately one of them didn't come out. My mom passed away. So it's been a very touching experience for me, but it's also been a learning experience. It's told me about don't take life for granted, meaning enjoy every moment and be who you are today and think about today rather than yesterday and tomorrow.
Well, don't take life for granted. Don't take the customer for granted. That's the message that we take away from this conversation as well. Robin, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. We wish you the very best of luck and the team at EbixCash the very best of luck. And we hope to catch up with you on future developments as well. Appreciate your time here on CNBC TV 18. Well, with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of the CNBC TV 18 special conversations. We'll take a break. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment with a lot more.